And now on Rough Diamond Radio, we have the last installment of Hengist's Inheritance.
Chapter 62. Jesus, what was that? Rosie squealed as the thump-thump of the gun started up. At a guess, the army trying to shoot something down. Plumley helpfully pointed out. Pack up the cameras, and let's get out of here, Hengist said to Rosie. Hengist approached Plumley. So nice talking to you, Ronald. Now remember, if I get any further problem with you, there'll be a large first-class envelope full of interesting photos and film, winging its way to the Sunday papers. Hengist picked up his bag that now held the cameras. What, you're leaving me like this? Plumley rattled his handcuffs to prove his point. Why not? I thought you liked things like that. Because there's a bloody air raid on, and I don't want to be blown to bits. He's got a point, Rosie said. Okay, take the handcuffs off, but leave his legs tied. You can untie your legs when we leave. Chapter 63. Reaching the gateway to the hall, Shelby shot through at top speed. Corporal Dawson and Private Williams, who were on guard duty at the gatehouse, were intently watching the glowing lights in the sky, proudly watching the battery in action for the first time. On seeing headlights flying up the drive towards his guard post, Corporal Dawson walked to the middle of the drive, held up his hand instructing the car to stop. Shelby wasn't stopping for anything or anyone. He simply pushed the accelerator harder to the floor, and he smashed through the checkpoint, sending Dawson and Williams flying backwards into the bushes, screaming. Scrambling back to his feet, Dawson grabbed his rifle, raised it to his shoulder just as the black car carrying Mr. Joshua and Mr. Tree shot through the gateway after Shelby. Dawson looked over his shoulder at the black car approaching him at a lethal speed. He flung himself into the bushes for the second time in 15 seconds. Getting back to his feet for a second time, this time severely pissed off, raised his rifle and fired after the cars. He missed both cars, but the bullet carried on regardless and hit the radio operator's tin helmet, which unfortunately was being worn by said operator at the time. Private Williams took the hint. He also raised his rifle and opened fire. His first round hit Shelby's front wheel, sending the car skidding off the drive onto the grass. Shelby, in his panic, didn't lift his foot off the accelerator, so his car, screaming at full throttle, careened sideways and headed across the lawn, showering turf and mud in its wake, straight into the number 1 gun pit. This impact scattered sandbags as if they were duck feather pillows, knocking the crew aside and smashing the gun off its mount. The gun's crew scrambled to safety, but the gun had waited for this moment all its life and wasn't going to stop firing until the ammunition hopper was empty, regardless of where it was pointing. Thud. Thud, the round sprayed out. The first round smashed into the hall's tower, blasting a large chunk of masonry off the parapet. The second round passed through Shelby's car engine block instantly, causing the whole car to burst into flames. Thud. The next round scored a direct hit on the hall's dovecot, causing it to disintegrate along with its 12 feathered occupants, giving the impression that it had started to snow. Shelby scrambled out of the car, flames licking at his ass, as the gun continued firing. He then ran, still screaming his head off, towards the hall's kitchen door. Mr. Joshua and Mr. Tree, on seeing Shelby running towards the hall, drove after him. Pulling up in a shower of gravel at the kitchen door, they jumped out and chased Shelby into the kitchen. Corporal Dawson, seeing the people who had smashed through his checkpoint running off, took aim and fired again at them. He again missed. The round hit a wall 10 inches from Captain Fanshawe, who up until then had been facing the opposite way, watching the lights in the sky and the battery's attempt in shooting them down. On turning around and seeing the burning vehicles behind him. What the fuck is going on? second round thudding into the wall near him decided his next move. He hollered, "We're under attack from the rear. Corporal, get your squad here, and return fire immediately." The corporal did as ordered, and soon his squad was returning fire at the gloomy figures in their rear. As Corporal Dawson and Private Williams scrabbled for cover to avoid the incoming fire, they were joined by one of the perimeter patrols. "What's going on, Corporal?" "We're under attack, that's what, so shut the fuck up and return fire." The Battle of Plumley Hall had started. Chapter 64. Sir Tarquin finished his pie. Pushing his plate forward, he sat back in his chair, sipping his wine. "Mabel, that was sublime, dear lady," he said as the window behind Lady Tavistock shattered as several rifle rounds entered the room to knock large lumps of plaster off the walls and ceiling. "It seems things are developing outside, my dear," Sir Tarquin said, leaving his seat and walking to the window. He started to draw the curtains back. "Sir, remember the blackout," Pringle warned. Pulling the curtain aside, Sir Tarquin looked out. "I think the blackout is now superfluous, Pringle." The four of them looked out over the grounds. Shelby's burning car was illuminating the whole of the grounds and had set off the stockpiled ammunition in the number 1 gun pit, which was generating an impressive firework display as the gun continued firing in all directions. Flashes could also be seen coming from the gatehouse at the bottom of the drive as shadowy figures ran back and forth. Another rifle round crashed into the window frame. "I think maybe I should pop out and see what's happening, my love. Pringle, escort the women to the cellar if you would be so kind." "I think not, Tarquin. Where you go, so do I." "As you wish, my dear," said Sir Tarquin, opening his bedside cabinet and taking out his Webley .38 service pistol, putting it in his pocket. He then offered Lady Tavistock his elbow. "Shall we go?" Sir Tarquin and Lady Tavistock walked arm in arm out of the room, with Pringle and Mabel following at a crouch, flinching at each bullet that entered the building. Chapter 65. Hengist and Rosie entered the corridor, turning to the right, walked down towards the main building. Pausing at the door. "I think you can put your coat back on now," Hengist said to Rosie. Rosie looked down as if for the first time, and noticed her near nakedness. "Oh God, I forgot." As she rummaged in her bag for her coat, Plumley, who had freed himself in seconds, shot out of the study, ran down the corridor and disappeared into his bedroom. "I guess Alice is returning to Wonderland," Rosie said. "Never mind him. Hurry, let's go." Okay, it's at the bottom of all this stuff," Rosie explained. But before she could extricate her coat, Plumley reappeared at the far end of the corridor, still dressed as Alice, but now sporting a double-barreled shotgun. "Stay right where you are, old boy." "Run?" Hengist shouted, and flung himself at the door to the main house. Rosie screamed, then still clasping the bag, followed Hengist as Plumley sprinted down the corridor. Lady Tavistock and Sir Tarquin entered the grand hall from the east wing. At the precise moment the door to the west wing flew open, and Hengist and Rosie shot out, with Plumley in hot pursuit. Plumley only stopping to fire and reload his shotgun. Lady Tavistock turned to Sir Tarquin. "Darling?" "Yes, my dear." "Was that Alice in Wonderland chasing a man and a naked woman?" "Indeed, it was, my love." Chapter 66. Clattering through the kitchen door, Hengist ran into the kitchen. Plumley stormed, gun in hand, after him. They had done 2 circuits of the kitchen table, before Plumley used a chair to clamber onto the table. Hengist stopped running as Plumley pointed the shotgun straight at him. "Right, old boy, it's like this. I think you're right, the gravy train is coming to the terminus, and I think it is indeed time to move on. But one needs to finance such a move. So I take those coins back if you would be so kind." When Hengist didn't reply, Rosie shouted, "Give them to the sod, they're not worth dying for." "But it's my inheritance." Hengist flummed. "Look." I don't care if they're the crown jewels of King Carlos von Trump of Staatsburg. Hand them over, pleaded Rosie, then she changed tack. Hengist, give them to him or. I'll tell Harriet you said I look better in my underwear than she does in hers. I never said that, protested Hengist. I know, but that's what I'll tell her. Fuck me, what chance have I got? None at all, old boy, none at all. So is the last time I'm going to ask. Hand them over, Plumley said. Hengist sulkily took the small red box out of his pocket and threw it to Plumley, who caught it easily. He then thrust the box into the safety of his apron pouch. As the door to the garden flew inwards again, and Shelby ran in screaming, his pursuers only feet behind him. On seeing Plumley standing on the table, he flung himself at his feet, crying and grasping his ankles like a distraught Mills and Boone heroine. Ronald! Ronald, they are after me! Help! Shelby cried out. Ronald turned and pointed the shotgun at Mr. Tree. It had about the same success as King Canute had with the tide. Mr. Tree and Mr. Joshua slowly closed in on Shelby. Before they could reach Shelby, 4 heavily armed soldiers led by Captain Fanshawe also crashed into the kitchen. All of you down to the cellar now? He was then rendered speechless by the sight of Alice in Wonderland, armed with a shotgun, standing on the kitchen table, a pair of hairy bollocks hanging just below her hemline. One of the accompanying soldiers, seeing Alice pointing a weapon at his officer, fired his rifle. The noise was deafening. All in the room watched as the bits of Plumley's disintegrated Alice band fluttered slowly to the floor, followed by Plumley, who collapsed in a heap onto the table. Mabel rushed up to her despised employer and announced with a hint of disappointment in her voice, "He's only fainted." Then a voice boomed out, "Who is responsible for all this?" Everyone froze and looked at Sir Tarquin, standing arm in arm with Lady Tavistock. Fanshawe, on seeing Sir Tarquin, rushed up to him. "Sir, we are under attack at this time, and I must insist you all take refuge in the cellar while we fortify the hall." Then, on seeing Sir Tarquin's uniform and rank, added, "Colonel." "Rubbish, man. Those are all British .303 rounds, I can hear," Sir Tarquin said, striding to the door. "Follow me, Captain." "And you men," said Sir Tarquin, addressing the 4 soldiers, "guard these people, and if they attempt to leave, shoot them." "Yes, sir," came the reply. Then he said to Lady Tavistock, "Shan't be too long, my love. Maybe you could take charge here and possibly arrange desert." "I shall indeed, Tarquin." Rosie took the opportunity, all the confusion offered, to slip into the larder to put her clothes back on. As she pulled her stockings up, there came a tapping noise at the larder window. She looked up to see Alf staring and grinning. Opening the window, she said, "How long have you been there watching?" "Long enough, Petal, but don't worry, I'm a married man, I've seen such things before." Then, still smiling, added, "But seldom in such proportions and in such pretty wrapping." Rosie grinned back. "Nice of you to say so, but get in for God's sake, it's getting weird in there." Alf climbed in through the window, and then he changed back into his vicar's outfit. One final adjustment of his dog collar, he opened the larder door a crack to see what was going on. He came face to face with a rifle barrel. The door was pulled fully open, and a young soldier called out, "There are 2 hiding in the larder corp." "Bring them in then," came the reply. "Come on in and join the party," the young soldier said, gestured with his rifle they should leave the larder. Chapter 67. Lady Tavistock turned to Mabel and Pringle. "I think several pots of tea, and any cake and biscuits you have, please, Mabel." "Yes, m'lady." Lady Tavistock then took stock of the room. There was a vicar with 2 young people standing next to him, who she didn't recognize. Plumley was coming to on the table, with Shelby still crying, holding on to his legs. The 4 soldiers Sir Tarquin had left as guards stood nervously, rifles at the ready. Then she noticed 2 men in sharp black suits, standing in silence at the far end of the table. Approaching the men, a broad smile crossed her face. Mr. Joshua, how lovely to see you again. Always a pleasure to see you, Lady Tavistock. I hope your journey back from Africa was a pleasant one. Lady Tavistock said, I'm sorry I didn't have opportunity to thank you for all your work undertook for me in Kenya. It was a trivial matter, Lady Tavistock. How you got that elephant to do as you wanted, I'll never know. Mr. Joshua smiled. I presume that it isn't a social call that brings you to Plumley Hall this evening, Mr. Joshua. You would be correct in assuming that, Lady Tavistock. May I also be so bold as to ask who the individual is who warranted such a visit? Mr. Joshua looked down at the mess that was Shelby. Mr. Shelby here has a ticket booked for trip on the SS Turpin to Montevideo, Uruguay tomorrow. Mr. Greenfield most eager that he is on board when it sails. A one-way ticket, I take it. Indeed, it is, Lady Tavistock. Lady Tavistock thought for a moment. May I have a word in private, Mr. Joshua? Of course, Lady Tavistock. They walked to the far corner of the kitchen and continued their conversation. Chapter 68. On leaving the kitchen, Sir Tarquin surveyed the scene before him. Shelby's car still burned in the gun pit, causing the anti-aircraft rounds to detonate with a cacophony of noise and intense white flashes which sent shells flying into the air. Soldiers crouched behind any sort of cover they could find and returned fire to the gatehouse. The lanterns were burning out one by one, but the remaining operational gun still thumped rounds into the blackness, as soldiers scurried through the darkness fetching more ammunition. Fanshawe, crouching to avoid incoming rounds that came whizzing past his head, tugged at Sir Tarquin coat sleeve. For God's sake, sir, take cover. Sir Tarquin looked down at Fanshawe. Stand up, man. Show an example. Fanshawe reluctantly straightened up. They seem to have taken the gatehouse, sir, and have fortified their position. With that, a round from the gun one pit struck the tower, blowing a corner off, sending a shower of masonry out 20 yards. Also sending the howling air raid siren flying over the edge to land with a giant thud, still howling at Sir Tarquin's feet. Sir Tarquin simply looked down at the offending equipment. Then he took out his service revolver and shot the siren twice. It made a pitiful whine and fell silent. Sir Tarquin then took a deep breath, and in a roar perfected over years on a parade ground bellowed, "Company, cease fire." Then the gunfire quickly diminished into silence, and the gun pits stopped shooting up the sky. Even the gun in pit number 1 seemed to know the fun was over, and stopped its ammunition hopper empty. As the noise died away, Private Di Davies gingerly raised his head over what was left of the tower's parapet. Turning to his mate, Harry said, "Fuck me, boyo, that was worse than a Saturday night in Merthyr Tydfil, when Wales lose to England in the rugby." Then pointing a finger at Harry, "Not that happens much, boyo, isn't it?" Sir Tarquin looked around, then called out irritably, "Sergeant Major, where the devil are you?" "Here, sir," came the reply from the gloom. "Your place in situations such as this, Sergeant Major, is with you, commanding officer." "Yes, sir." "Well, now you're here, get a squad and put out that damn fire." "Fanshawe?" "Yes, sir." "Get that car off my lawn and tidy this bloody mess up. And take a roll call and a casualty list." "Yes, sir." "And Captain, I imagine your commanding officer will require an explanation for all this. And who, in the absence of any enemy combatants, the hell were you shooting at?" "I'd give that some thought if I was you, Captain." "Yes, sir, I sure will." Sir Tarquin walked off back to the kitchen. Chapter 69. Harriet sat blankly staring into space. What was happening, she thought. Had Hengist been arrested or hurt? Was he stuck somewhere? The bastard, how could he do this to her, leaving her at home to worry like this? She looked at the card Hengist had given her for the 10th time. Then, there was a knocking at the door. Harriet nearly jumped out of her skin. Composing herself and expecting the worst, she opened the door. Standing in front of her was a young woman. "Sorry to trouble you, but are you Mrs. Grump?" "Yes, how can I help you?" "May I speak to Hengist, please?" "Sorry, he's not in at the moment. What is it about, please?" "Sorry, it's private." "Private? I'm his wife. What has he been up to?" "No, nothing like that. He came to see me today about a letter he'd received." "Oh, you're Miss Tatler then?" "Yes." "Hengist said you couldn't tell him. Or was it a case of you wouldn't tell him anything?" "The latter, I'm afraid. But I've thought it over, and I think it's about time he knew the truth, such as it is. I'm expecting him back in about an hour. You're welcome to wait. We could have a cuppa and a chat. What's your name, by the way?" "I'm Harriet." "Josephine, but please just call me Joe." "Well, Joe, how do you like your tea, and what's this all about?" "Milk, 1 sugar please, Harriet." "Well, there's not much to tell." Chapter 70. On re-entering the kitchen, Sir Tarquin addressed the corporal. "Any problems?" "No, sir." "Good, good. Keep alert until I find out what's been going on here." "Yes, sir." On seeing Sir Tarquin had returned, Lady Tavistock approached him. "Ah, you're back, my love." Then taking him by the elbow whispered, "Darling, I think Providence has smiled on us." "Oh yes, my dear. Come, there's someone I'd like you to meet," she said, then led Sir Tarquin off. "May I introduce you to Mr. Joshua and his associate Mr. Tree?" The men swapped polite nods in acknowledgement of each other. "I have availed myself of Mr. Joshua's services previously, darling, and I may say the arrangements he made were faultless." "And what would these services be, if I may ask?" "They are associates of Stimson and Minge Solicitors, London, who oversee any and all requirements you could possibly need, from travel arrangements to pest control. They even do magic tricks." "Magic tricks?" "Yes, darling, they make things disappear." "And how can they be of help to us at this time, my dear?" "Apparently, my love, there is a ship docked at Frambourne, going to Uruguay." "Lady Tavistock," Mr. Joshua said helpfully. "Yes, that's right, Uruguay. And Mr. Shelby there." Lady Tavistock pointed to the sniveling heap, crouching in a corner. "Has a ticket booked for the crossing. Mr. Joshua has been commissioned to escort Mr. Shelby to the ship and see him safely on board." "I see. And as luck would have it, Mr. Joshua tells me that he can arrange passage for Ronald as well." "Indeed? It seems like a capital idea." He looked across at his brother, who was scowling back. "I think all things considered a long holiday would suit you, Ronald." "The fuck it would, old boy. You can stick." The rest of the sentence was cut short by a clump on the back of his head, delivered by the corporal. "Watch your mouth, there is a lady present." "Quite right, Corporal, quite right." Sir Tarquin turned to Mr. Joshua. "Mr. Joshua, what do you require to allow my brother to accompany Mr. Shelby his trip?" "Nothing, Sir Tarquin. We have transport here and everything else is in place. Adding an extra person will not be a problem. Lady Tavistock has also instructed me to put any cost incurred on her account, should your lordship decide to avail yourself of this service." "Corporal." "Yes, sir?" "Escort these gentlemen to their transport and off the grounds, and Corporal." "Yes, sir." "If these two," he pointed at Plumley and Shelby, "give you any trouble or refuse to go, shoot them." "With pleasure, Colonel." Shelby and Plumley were prodded at gunpoint to their feet and herded through the door. As Plumley reached the door, he turned to Lady Tavistock and Sir Tarquin. "You've not heard the last of." Another clout in the ear cut him short. "We have tonight, Sunbeam," said the corporal and shoved him outside. Mr. Tree followed the corporal out as Mr. Joshua turned to Sir Tarquin. "If there is anything else we can help with, Sir Tarquin, Lady Tavistock knows how to contact us, sir." Then turning to Lady Tavistock added, "It's been a pure pleasure to be of assistance to your ladyship again." "Lovely to see you again, Mr. Joshua. Please give my regards to Mr. Greenfield." "Will do, your ladyship," Mr. Joshua said, and followed the others out to the black car, which stood unmarked where they had left it. The corporal prodded and shoved Plumley and Shelby into the car, and watched as the black car slowly picked its way through the detritus of the firefight down the drive. Reaching the gatehouse, the car turned right and headed for Frambourne. The corporal, his orders completed, returned to the kitchen. Chapter 71. As Plumley was marched out of the kitchen, Rosie whispered to Hengist, "Has he still got the coins?" Hengist nodded. "Bugger, what are we going to do?" "At the moment, we have a more pressing problem," Hengist said as Lady Tavistock, arm in arm with Sir Tarquin, approached them. "So what your story then?" Before he could reply, Mabel interrupted. "Sir Tarquin, may I have a word in private, please?" "Certainly, dear lady. Would in there be suitably private?" "Ideal, sir." They walked into the larder cupboard. Pringle followed. 5 minutes passed, then the larder door opened, and they re-entered the kitchen. Sir Tarquin, still arm in arm with Lady Tavistock, approached Hengist, Rosie, and Alf. "I have been informed that your presence here today was due to the disgraceful conduct of my brother. I have also been advised that it is in my best interest and that of Plumley Hall that I leave it at that. Which advice I will take." "Thank you, sir," was all Hengist could say. "Also," Sir Tarquin continued, "Pringle here tells me that you are responsible for bringing to light the discrepancy in the estate's accounts." "Yes, sir." "We have also been informed," it was Lady Tavistock who spoke this time, "that you may be the person responsible for a certain fraudulent telegram I received this morning. Is that the case?" Hengist swallowed and confessed. "Yes, your ladyship, I'm responsible for that." She looked to Sir Tarquin. "Well, please accept my deepest thanks for making me aware of the situation." Sir Tarquin held out his hand. "I also thank you, young man." Sir Tarquin then turned to the soldiers. "Corporal, you can stand your men down now. And please accompany Mr. Grump and his group safely off the grounds." "Yes, sir." Hengist, Rosie, and Alf left the kitchen. Sir Tarquin turned to Mabel. "I think dessert is now in order, Mabel, if that's possible." "Would crumble and custard suit your lordship?" Mabel asked. Capital, capital, dear lady." "I'll bring straight up, sir," Pringle said. "No need, we'll eat here and bring 4 bowls and join us." "Yes, join us please, Mabel. We have the wedding to discuss." "Yes, m'lady." Mabel went happily to fetch the dessert. Chapter 72. Outside, Hengist walked over to the motorbike combination. "This is my transport, Corporal," Hengist said, getting onto the motorbike. "Sorry, but my car is around the corner at the east wing," Rosie added. "Not a problem, miss. I'll escort you there." Jenkins. "Yes, Corp." "Make sure this gentleman gets safely off the grounds." "Okay, Corp." As Alf walked off following Rosie to her car, he called out to Hengist. "We'll pick Mavis up and see you back at yours in a bit then, mate." "Okay, Alf," said Hengist as he placed the bag with the cameras in safely into the sidecar. Starting the bike up, he slowly followed the soldier down the drive. Reaching the gatehouse, now pockmarked with bullet holes, he thanked his escort and rode off towards home. Chapter 73. The black car that held Mr. Joshua's group sped along the road. Shelby still whimpering, Ronald Plumley sat silently shivering in his Alice dress, and one hand in his apron pocket, keeping a tight grip on the little red box. The car soon turned through the gate of Frambourne Dockyard. Stopping at the security checkpoint, a rotund dockyard official walked over to them, clipboard in hand. Mr. Joshua wound down the window, handed a plain brown paper envelope to the man without a word. The dockyard official scribbled something down on his clipboard and raised the barrier and said, "The SS Turpin, rust stains running down from her gunnels and anchor ports, her bilge pumps removing water from the paint-peeling hull. Wallowed sadly at her mooring." Mr. Tree grabbed the sniveling Shelby by the scruff of his neck, while Mr. Joshua took a more dignified attitude by twisting Plumley's arm behind his back. Then both men were marched up the gangplank. At the top of the gangplank, they were met by a man wearing a grubby grease-smeared uniform and a white peaked cap. "Good evening, I am Captain Stefanich. Welcome aboard the SS Turpin." "Thank you, Captain. There has been a change in the amount of cargo we require shipped to Montevideo this trip." "Is that so, Mr. Joshua? We now require double the hold space. But we hope this." He removed another brown envelope out of his jacket pocket and handed it to Captain Stefanich. "Will compensate you for any inconvenience." Captain Stefanich thumbed through the notes in the envelope and smiled. "I am sure we can arrange that for you, Mr. Joshua," he said, putting the envelope inside his shirt. He turned to two very large and equally grubby crew members. "Please take our guests to the forward stateroom." Both men laughed while relieving Mr. Tree and Mr. Joshua of their charges. "Sorry, Mr. Joshua, that's also known to the crew as the forward anchor chain locker." Their business concluded, Mr. Joshua shook hands with Captain Stefanich. Then both he and Mr. Tree walked back down the gangplank to the car. They drove down the quayside and out of the dockyard and started home. Captain Stefanich watched them leave, then walked after his crew members. On reaching the forward anchor locker, he opened the heavy watertight door. Shelby and Plumley sat on a large pile of wet, oily anchor chain. Shelby, his head in his hands, continued sniveling. Ronald, his Alice in Wonderland dress now ripped and oil-stained. "Welcome aboard, gentlemen. We cast off within the hour, but I apologize, as you will have to remain here until we reach international waters. Then you will become members of the crew. And if you want to eat during the crossing to Uruguay, you will undertake any work you are instructed to do. But I must say you, Alice, will be a welcome diversion for the crew, as the trip to Uruguay is a long one and there are no women aboard. But luckily my crew aren't too fussy." The door was closed and Ronald sat in silence, still gripping the red box. He smiled. He still had the gold. Chapter 74. Hengist pulled up outside his house and turned off the motorbike. Harriet, on hearing him arrive, rushed out to meet him. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah, I suppose so, Petal." "We have company, Hengist darling," she quickly whispered. "What?" "We have company, a Miss Tatler." Hengist and Harriet returned to their kitchen, where the young woman sat. "This is a surprise, Josephine," Hengist said as he sat down. "Sorry, Hengist, I thought about this, and you deserve to know what I know, but I warn you it's not much." "Please do carry on, Josephine." "Well, about 2 years ago Mother asked me to accompany her to an appointment at a solicitor in London. She was becoming very frail and needed help getting around. When I asked her what the appointment was for, she just said it was to fulfill a promise she'd made to my father many years ago. But she was so ill and frail she was instructing a solicitor to do it for her. That's all I know." "What were the instructions she was given, Joe?" "No idea. But you were with her at the solicitor's. Please, try and remember." She insisted on going into the meeting alone, Hengist. "I waited outside in the waiting room, so what the details were I have no idea." Hengist sighed. "So, what did Nathan Yap have to do with the letter about my inheritance?" "No idea. He disappeared when I was 2, so I don't remember him at all. All I know is my mother always said she should have stayed working on the buses with my grandfather. And never have married him. She even described him a few times as a horrible man. But every time I brought the subject up of my father, she would refuse to speak about him." Also, when I asked why we changed our surname from Yap to Tatler, her maiden name as you know, she just said Nathan Yap wasn't a very nice man. Harriet looked out of the window. Rosie and Alf and your mum are here, Hengist, she said as a car pulled up next to the motorbike. Let them in, will you please, darling? Hengist asked. Harriet went to the door and returned with Alf, Mavis and Rosie. Alf dropped heavily down in a chair. Then everybody started to talk at once. Hengist just sat there thinking. So that pervert walked off with the bloody coins after all. Harriet said. We could always go to the ship and see if we could get them off him there. What was the ship called? Rosie said. The SS Turpin. Hengist said. Any point giving it a go, do you think, Hengist? None at all, Alf, Hengist said. Oh well, your plan nearly worked, son. Yeah, almost. Mind you, you went over the top with the guns. People could have been killed. Alf pointed out. Those guns opening fire was a mistake. Hengist admitted. I just thought the Chinese lanterns would cause the alarm to be raised and siren to go off, keeping them looking the other way, not start a full-scale battle. And what were those two blokes in black suits doing there? Rosie asked. Well, that was a bit of a risk. I knew they would be calling to see that Shelby bloke at some point, but wasn't sure when or what they would do when they did turn up. But I was surprised when they turned up at the hall. But it worked out well in the end. And it was you who sent the telegram to Lady Tavistock then? Alf asked. Yes, I knew that was a long shot, but it turned out to be a masterstroke, I think. What I don't understand is why we just didn't sneak in after dark and quietly take the coins. I mean, you knew where they were and how to get them. Mavis said. You knew where they were and how to get them. Rosie spluttered. Yes, Rosie. Then why all the bullshit about that Plumley looking at the fireplace? Giving himself away and the film and photos and stuff? I needed to have him believe that I knew more than I did. Also, I needed him to believe that I had contacts who were able to, regardless of his power and position, screw him up, and had the balls to use the photos and film we took. I mean, if he thought I was one bloke, he'd come after me. But if I could have him believe that I was part of a powerful group who has resources and influence, maybe he'd think twice before starting anything. Josephine stood up. I'm sorry, Hengist, this is a family matter, so I think I should go. Hengist looked around the room. Sorry, how rude of me. This is Josephine Tatler, everyone. Her mother was responsible for sending the letter that started this all off. Turning to Josephine said, Don't you want to know what this all about, Joe? Sorry, what do you mean? Josephine asked. There have been a few things that have been bothering me about that letter, but I think I got it sorted now. Things like what? Alf said. Well, like, why was the widow of the man responsible for my father's death sending me a letter informing me of my inheritance? We also know that whoever sent me that letter must have known the story of William Trumpton and my unique birthmark. Nathan Yap simply couldn't have known about those 2 points. So when I asked myself why was Nathan Yap sending me a letter, the fact was he didn't. Who did then, Hengist? Mavis said. I'll get to that, Mum. Another thing that worried me was your money, Josephine. My money? Yes, your money. The house you live in is large, opulent, and therefore I take it very expensive. Also, you don't work, but you must live off something. So I assume you have money. Yes, I'm comfortably provided for. But I came into my money when my mother passed away. She left me the house and her savings and some other things. But you just told me your mother worked on the buses, as did your grandfather, and Nathan Yap was a second-rate luggage thief. Hardly Rothschild-level income, is it? I suppose not. Josephine admitted. So where did the money come from? Go on. Josephine was transfixed now. Now my mum assures me that my father is one Davy Wilson. Davy Wilton was a crook, apparently a very successful one, but also a very private person. Even his brother didn't see him for weeks between jobs. Alf, you said Davy could charm the birds out of the trees. This was confirmed by you, Mum, when you said he was a charming rogue, and the ladies couldn't resist his good looks and charm. And without doubt he would know about my particular birthmark, and William Trumpton's story. We can therefore say that with little doubt that Davy Wilson sent me that letter. But I still had to work out why was Mrs. Yapney Tatler involved. The thing that put me on the right track was the realization that a woman is unlikely to be troubled in keeping a promise for 21 years, given to a person she described as horrible. But she would for a lover. A lover. Or an old flame if you prefer. But my mother definitely said she'd made to promise to my father. And so she did. But Nathan Yap wasn't your father. What? Davy Wilson had the money to purchase 4 Wellbrook Crescent and supply finance for you to live on. He also was bound to have the contacts to appear like your mum had legally come into the money. Why would he do that? Well, you of course. And then there's the little thing of why Nathan Yap took the trouble to cause Davy Wilson's death. Yes, I'd like to know that. Alf said. My bet is somehow Nathan Yap found out about the relationship between your mum and Davy Wilson. Probably when you arrived, Joe. Yap wanted to get control of your mum's income, I have no doubt. But knew that was impossible with Davy around. So he loosened those ladders. But that doesn't explain your letter. Harriet said. Again, my best bet is after a job in Scotland, Davy wanted to hide his ill-gotten gains, but didn't want to risk them being lost forever. So he left a letter and instructions on what to do in the unlikely event he couldn't retrieve them. And who better to hide the letter and carry out his wish than your mother, Joe? And who better to leave it to but his son? His daughter was already financially secure. He couldn't leave it to a 1-year-old, so he set things up for my 21st birthday. That means you are my brother. Yep, and that's your uncle and that's your sister-in-law. Hengist pointed to Alf and Harriet. Josephine sat open-mouthed. Mavis turned on Alf. Did you know about this? Not a fucking clue, sweetheart. So all in all, not a bad day, Hengist said. We rid young Doris at the solicitors of that Shelby. We removed the infestation that was Ronald Plumley at the Hall. Got Sir Tarquin and Lady Tavistock back together, which will make Pringle and Mavis happy. And gained a sister. Just a pity we missed the whole point of the exercise, getting those coins back. Harriet said. Well, Hengist put his hand into his pocket and pulled out a small leather bag. That's not strictly true. Always have backup plans, folks. I had Solly arrange for 24 fake coins to be made for me, which I swapped for the real ones hidden in the fireplace. Before setting up the cameras, and Plumley appeared to meet Rosie. So that Plumley got away with what in that little red box? Rosie asked. 1/2 pound of lead and lick of gold paint. Bloody hell! Exclaimed Alf. Hengist stood up and said, Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Hengist's inheritance. As he tipped 27 gold coins onto the table. Epilogue. Sir Tarquin, Lady Tavistock. On December the 10th, 1939, the marriage took place at the private chapel at Plumley Hall, of Sir Tarquin Plumley and Jennifer Laura Tavistock. The ceremony was presided over by the Reverend Josiah Franklin. It was a small private ceremony, with only a select few present. Best man and maid of honor at the ceremony was Sir Tarquin's butler and housekeeper respectively. Sir Tarquin and his new bride honeymooned in Egypt, where Sir Tarquin rekindled his passion for archaeology. A passion that was enthusiastically shared by the now Lady Plumley. The pair are inseparable. Pringle and Mabel. After overseeing the repairs to the hall, and arranging Sir Tarquin's wedding. Pringle had been instructed to employ 5 new members of staff, in any capacity he deemed fit, to keep the hall and estate running, while Pringle and Mabel took a month off to settle into their new large estate cottage, gifted to them by Sir Tarquin. Mabel and Pringle were then informed the increase of staff would be permanent, and Mabel and Pringle's new role, should they accept it, was to simply oversee the hall. The Pringles were often to be seen taking tea and cakes on the hall's veranda with Sir Tarquin and Lady Plumley. Doris had been pleased at the resignation of Shelby and the return of Mr. Henderson. But she was over the moon when Mr. Henderson replaced Shelby with a newly graduated solicitor, a handsome young man called Robin Vale. The young couple hit it off straight away. A romance started, and they were married within a year. Then at their wedding reception, during the reading of the best wishes cards and telegrams, the best man was baffled and handed one letter to the newlyweds. It was a simple plain card with the letter H written on it, and enclosed was a check for £200, Captain Fanshawe. When the fires had been put out, and the worst of the mess had been cleaned up, Captain Fanshawe was ordered to Major Parker Smith's command truck to explain the events of what was now known as the Battle of Plumley Hall. Annoyed by the phone call he'd received from the brigadier at Regimental HQ, Major Parker Smith placed Fanshawe under arrest until he could convene a court-martial. At the court-martial, all present were expecting Captain Fanshawe to have his commission revoked at least. However, when Sir Tarquin was called to give evidence on his part of the incident, he asked if he could approach the bench, as he had intelligence-sensitive information poignant to the case. The presiding officer, Major Parker Smith, agreed. Sir Tarquin whispered in his ear. Major Parker Smith then informed the court that he was dismissing the charge, and recommending Captain Fanshawe be mentioned in dispatches. As he left the court, Fanshawe approached Sir Tarquin and asked what information he was privy to that caused his release. Sir Tarquin looked at Fanshawe. I simply said, Linda the verger's wife from Yardley-on-Water sends him her best. Captain returned to the battery. Rosie. One thing bothered Rosie about the events of the evening, and that was poor Margaret Ponsonby. Rosie didn't like the fact that the woman had been deprived of some income, and may well be sitting waiting frightened for the police to knock on the door. I mean, after all, it wasn't her fault. So the next morning she drove to 23 Weasel Street. A worried-looking Margaret opened the door. Rosie handed her the white envelope she picked up off the mantelpiece, and explained her reason for calling. Margaret invited Rosie in, and over several cups of tea they hit it off. So much so the visit ended up with them in bed together. Both Rosie or Margaret ever looked back. Plumley and Shelby. Plumley and Shelby were released from the forward anchor chain locker the following morning, and given a tin of grey paint, a brush, and pointed at a part of the ship more rust-stained and grubby than the rest. They spent the next month painting steelwork, mopping decks, and in Plumley's case, hiding or running away to evade the attentions of the less fussy members of the crew. Their clothes turned into rags. But they were only given clean clothes, and the opportunity to wash and shave 2 weeks out on the occasion of the captain's birthday. This birthday party was a double-edged sword. Shelby's edge was he received a set of overalls and boots 2 sizes too big for him, and allowed to join the rest of the crew for dinner. Plumley's edge was he was given a pair of high-heel shoes, a purple taffeta dress, a blonde wig, and instructions to wait in the captain's cabin until he returned from his birthday drink. Then to turn the lights low and call him Honey Bunny. All through the voyage, Plumley managed to keep the coins hidden from everyone, even Shelby. On arrival in Montevideo 1 month and 1 day after leaving Frambourne, Plumley was waved off the ship by Captain Stefanich with tears in his eyes, and Shelby, who had signed up to join the crew of the SS Turpin for their next trip to Singapore. Walking down the gangplank of the SS Turpin, wearing the wig and taffeta dress the captain had given him as a gift, the coins hidden in his underwear, he made straight to the largest bank he could find. An hour later found him, grazes on his knees from being thrown out of the bank. and was last seen standing outside the dock gates, wearing his wig and taffeta dress, plying for trade. Hengist? Hengist returned the cameras to Solly the next day, and a plan was reached to sell 19 of the coins, Hengist retaining the remaining 10. A month later, as arranged, Hengist returned for the accounting. Solly had manufactured a flawless paper trail that stated without doubt that Hengist was the legal owner of the coins, and therefore free to dispose of them as he saw fit. Solly had placed 5 coins with private collectors, and the rest with several coin dealers and auction houses. They had fetched an average of £397. After fees, Solly's percentage and expenses left Hengist with a grand total of £5,657. Solly also had taken the liberty of opening a bank account with Coutts Bank in Hengist's name, and deposited £5,600 into it, and handed the £57 balance to him in cash, along with the bank details and a checkbook. Hengist next called Simpson and Minge. After a quick conversion with the secretary, he was put through to Mr. Greenfield, who was more than willing to see Hengist without an appointment. Hengist instructed Simpson and Minge to investigate the possibility of purchasing the house next to 4 Wellbrook Crescent, Upper Wyndham, also arranging for several people to receive financial windfalls. A year later, when everything had settled down, and everyone was getting on with life, Hengist arranged a get-together in the upstairs room at the Wheatsheaf for his birthday. He sat there happy with all his friends. Alf and his mum talking to Pringle and Mabel, Mark propping up the bar explaining a train timetable to enthralled Josephine, Rosie and Margaret giggling like school kids, Doris and her new husband sharing the news they were expecting a baby. Sir Tarquin and Lady Plumley, back from Egypt, had taken the time to pop in. Even Solly and Mr. Joshua turned up. Creeper was also there apparently, but Hengist never saw him. Then the door opened, and in walked 2 suited men holding out a warrant card. One of the men said, "Hengist Grump? MI5, can we have a word?"